they would be. And we're live on YouTube.
Okay.
I'm not sure how it's gonna work because we
Okay.
did it before. So yeah, we're exploring each other's opportunities.
And is that live on YouTube through Instagram or live on YouTube through Zoom?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Can you come again because I think the YouTube just crossed over.
Does this go from Zoom to Instagram to YouTube, or does this go from Zoom to both Instagram and YouTube at the same time?
I think we're having a really weird live broadcasting in Instagram because it's literally I'm literally like showing them our stream right now, so I'm not sure it's gonna work uh, for most people. But it goes from Zoom to YouTube at the moment.
Okay.
We have one little advantage, which I'm not sure we're going to use or not, but because we're in Zoom, we don't have a limit of time because like 1 hour and Instagram kick us out. Here, we might go a little bit beyond that.
That's
But
fine. Oh, so you have a Zoom Pro account.
I do. I had to. I had
Me
to.
too. I also had to. So
Okay.
welcome to the Zoom world. Here we are in our
Oh,
new meeting room.
yes.
Oh yeah, hold on. Yeah, I can do this too. Look, we have the same cup.
Oh, nice.
Very
Cheers.
nice. Cheers. Nostrovia.
На здоровье, да. But yeah, we're
How's
not drinking vodka right now.
how's Moscow? How's the weather? How are people doing? Are we
Well,
covering their bases?
I can't answer you that because I'm in St. Petersburg at the moment.
Oh, you're gonna say, I thought you lived in Moscow.
No, I live in St. Petersburg,
I see.
but they're not that far from each other. Just a 3 hour train.
And then is it safer to take the train than a plane? Do most
I
people take
think
the
it's
train?
not the safety measures. It's just a little bit more convenient because you don't have to go outside of the town, get into the airport, go into another airport, and then out of it inside the town. You just go straight from
Station
town.
to station.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's how it is.
Yep. This is what Europe has taught me. And I love trains. And I've taken since I've been touring in Europe, it's taught me, oh, I can take trains in the States as well.
Yeah. You did not before?
Yeah, I wouldn't think about it, but especially if I'm on the East Coast or if I'm going between Boston and New York for sure, or any places in between Boston and New York, then there's lots and lots of trains that it just makes it very easy. And you land, when you go to New York City, you land right in the middle of the city. When you go to Boston, you just are in the south side of Boston. So, yep, I like the trains. But
Yeah.
St. Petersburg, yeah.
You you have received invitations to come to St. Petersburg. Not once, I believe.
Yeah, I've had invitations for both, and I very much want to come. I have heard, or I sense that St. Petersburg is like the Chicago of Russia.
In what
So
sense?
like, well, if Moscow would be New York, then St. Petersburg would be Chicago or LA, but St. Petersburg seems to be more Chicago. So there's a lot of culture, a lot of art, a lot of history, a lot of parks. People are more like more different points of view, more different cultures, things like
Actually,
this.
after being inspired by how decentralized everything in US is, I wanted to start my theater in St. Petersburg because I thought, wait, like New York is a business capital, and then LA is like show business capital, and then Silicon Valley is the IT thing. So like I wanted to, to be spread out, and I thought I will like because the cultural capital sort of is St. Petersburg. I'll go there and I'll do the best like improv theater, and if people would go here, and then I came to St. Petersburg and I realized that oh shit, it's way different. Everything is in Moscow, like everything, literally. So I'm like, well, okay, yeah, I gotta do what I did, what I promised, and I still keep doing that.
Well, they call in the States, they call Chicago the second city. That's where the Second City improv and sketch comedy theater got its name, the Second City.
Yeah.
And I think that name came from New York because New York was the center of the universe. And so maybe in this way. And Chicago is also very much a theater town. So New York is television, LA is movies, and as you said,
Right.
Silicon Valley is IT, but Chicago is very much theater.
Mm.
And especially in the last 30 or 40 years, so many, it used to be if you wanted to do theater, you would go to New York, you would do the rat race to try to get on Broadway.
Mm.
But because the Chicago theater scene has become so vibrant, and because this community supports theater so much, it has evolved into this place where so many shows, before they go to Broadway, they test here in Chicago.
Wow,
So
interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that division. Thanks for clarifying that. Uh,
sure.
I usually start from asking my guest to introduce himself, because I know probably a lot of people, most people know you, but I'm not sure that our audience does. Um,
Um, you talked to Rebecca Northern yesterday, right?
I did, yeah.
Well, I'm Rebecca Northern's duo partner. Do I need to
Okay.
say anything more? No,
Yeah.
I'm Joe Bill. I'm from Chicago. I've done improv a long time. I've been in Chicago pretty much all of my improv career since university. Um, I don't. Yeah, I'm not too comfortable talking about myself for too long, but I've done a lot of things, and I'm also getting older, so some things I forget. But can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking here just to check whether people in Instagram have any questions, or are they even watching us? Because
Mhm. Um, so yes, I moved to Chicago in 1985. I'm one of the co-founders of Annoyance Theater.
mhm.
I studied at Second City and I taught at Second City. I studied at IO with Del Close and Sharna Halpern. I've taught at IO. I'm now the director of corporate training for IO. I tour all over the world. I've been touring internationally about 10 years, and then touring North America for probably 25 or something. And so improv festivals in the United States started basically in the 90s. And so when improv festivals started here, I was doing stuff there with the Annoyance Theater. I directed a show at the Annoyance called The Screw Puppies, which
Mhm.
was sort of a late night show that was kind of foul mouthed, and uh, we would like drink beer backstage and then try to do a show that was both vulgar but also intelligent.
Mhm.
Uh, and yeah, and then I'm one of the original duo members of kind of the first mono scene, Bass Prov, which is two guys fishing for bass. Myself and Mark Sutton. That started like in 2000 or 2001. I'm really bad with dates, so
Mhm. Okay.
and I've directed a number of shows. I've directed a lot. I've taught a lot. I've performed a lot. I've done. I first learned improvisation in high school in 1977, so that would be 43 years ago.
43 years. Yeah.
And I was just talking to David Rosowski yesterday, and we were realizing that we're the new old people. So I'm currently, as I'm sitting in isolation in Chicago, embracing the fact that I am one of the new old people.
Awesome. I just got to tell to everybody who's watching us on YouTube, I'm not sure how many people would, but if you do, you can ask questions, and I have my little device here, so I can totally see your questions, and I'll ask them. Uh, I'll ask Joe about them, and as well, yeah, probably that's it. That's it. That's what
Yeah, sure.
I'm gonna mention. Cool. So, the questions that I have are from different various aspects. And one of the things that I wanted to know is I was actually very it was very interesting for me to listen how Rebecca were telling me about how the Loose Moose Theater was organized, and how they come up with the show and what they did and how the rehearsals went. So how did that process went in and if we talk about Annoyance Theater?
So In the early days, our process was very much about developing full-length plays or musicals from
Mhm,
improvisation. So typically, it was improvising to find characters that were fun and then find those characters in different scenes that were fun and then scenes into acts of plays and then acts into a full-length play.
mhm,
Um, and it was, in a way, it was a little bit like the process where Second City started with sketch, whereas you would improvise. Second City would typically improvise a scenario, so they would be given a
mhm.
scenario in the early days. You're a husband and a wife, and the husband is for the government and the wife is against the government or
Right.
whatever.
Mhm,
But with Annoyance, Mick Napier was really the artistic vision of Annoyance. I went to university with Mick, with four of the other co-founders of Annoyance, and we came to Chicago, and then with some other people, we all came together. So even in college, in university, we would do shows, and we would aspire to do a new show every week. So that meant
mhm,
improvising characters and then improvising into scenes. So maybe the characters would have a scene and there was a seed of an idea, and then we would improvise it again, and Mick would give us a suggestion. And he was by and large the one we learned, because as we were all engaged in this process, he was it was like the head writer. So he's like, okay, try this, try this, try this, and we could all contribute. But he's the one that was kind of the smartest in seeing what something could be.
mhm,
And then, sometimes we would have different takes on stuff. And he was very, it was very collaborative, and it was he was really good at both seeking a consensus, at empowering people to make their own choices without being like a dictator. So I think our
mhm.
style initially, I directed a show. I think the Annoyance started in with well, before we were the Annoyance, we did a show called Splatter Theater, which is like a musical, except instead of singing, there would be a death. So it was like a slasher movie, but on stage. And
Okay.
at that point, we were Metroform, and Mick and I was the killer in this show, and so we designed a bunch of deaths. And then I think Mick came up with like the archetypes that you would find in a horror movie, and then
Mhm,
he cast those people, and those people would improvise different scenes, and he kind of shaped the show, and I was just responsible for making sure that everyone stayed safe when we were executing the different deaths.
mhm,
So the idea was, we had an idea of the format for the show. Mick sort of directed the whole thing, and then the specialty within it, because I was the killer, I had to oversee that. And then he directed Co-Ed Prison Sluts, which was our first show, and I think that started in 1989. And that
Was he
started with
the
the
one who created all the shows, and you kind of just followed his idea?
well, I mean, he was the original vision. So it
Mhm.
was like he was the head architect. He made the blueprint.
Right.
Um, even in university, he was just naturally a leader, and
Mhm.
he was very good at having a vision, expressing the vision, and he was very good at, and still is. He's not dead.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, I think one of the magic things about Mick is that he's very good at being a leader without being a dictator. And so
Mhm,
if you're in the shows, and I've been in many, many shows that he's directed, he is the final word on what's going to be and how things are going to go.
mhm,
But he's very, very smart at having the people that are creating the characters, the scenes, the plays. He's very smart about directing people in a way that they feel like they have ownership of their own characters.
mhm, mhm,
So you
mhm,
don't feel like you're doing something because Mick says you have to do it. He was very good at like inviting ideas, and this is maybe the hardest part of leadership, and managing human personalities and egos,
mhm,
is being you know, for sure having a firm hand on the wheel and steering the production,
Yeah.
but also inviting ideas until the very end of the process. And then he has to do what he has to do to make a show work.
Yeah.
And there's one example of that. I think it was the second or third show that he had directed. It was after Co-Ed Prison Sluts. There was a show called That Darned Antichrist.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a story about a kid who discovers he goes to a Boy Scout meeting, and he discovers from a nun and a scoutmaster that he is the Antichrist. And his family lives on a houseboat, and the mother is a wonderful actor who's like dressed in drag, and there's no mention of it. And he has a brother who's kind of mentally slow. He has a sister who's a genius. And I originally in this process was playing a character who was like a political activist and, you know, ran off on the mouth, and I played a harmonica and all of this. And his name was Mr. Perch. And 2 days, or maybe the day of, no, I think it was 2 days before the show opened, I walked in still thinking I was Mr. Perch, and he had a box with a Halloween costume that was a pig. And he gives me the costume and he says, "Congratulations, you're the pig." And I said, "What?" And he said something like, "We killed Mr. Perch. He doesn't exist anymore, but you're going to play a pig." And I said, "Okay." And I didn't know what he meant. All I knew is there was a pig costume, and I'm very big. And I put the pig costume on, and of course I was a little too big for the pig costume, but I really didn't speak in the entire play till the very end. And I became the Antichrist. Chip was the character's name. I just became his pet pig. And then at the end of the show, it's revealed that I was really a priest. I was like a spy, but I was a priest disguised as a pig. And, you know, he let me flesh out this character till the day before the show went up. And then he said, "Actually, you're the pig." And I knew, because I had worked with him, you know, in university, like he's really smart. And so my character wasn't working. And I said, "Okay, I'm the pig." And so that really, like, that captures the spirit of The Annoyance from my perspective.
It's especially interesting because what you're saying is like, for me, it's like structurized improv, where you have settled characters in advance with costumes, yet the whole thing is improvised. Is that right?
No, it ends up being mostly scripted.
Okay.
So the idea is you end up with a scripted play, but within that play, and this was a musical, That Darn Antichrist was a musical. Co-Ed Prison Sluts, our first show as Annoyance, was a musical.
Mm-hmm.
Then within that play, most of our shows would be between an hour and 20 and an hour and 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Within that play, there may be 2 or 3 spots where a little bit of improvisation can happen to keep it fresh.
Mm-hmm.
But we knew at the beginning of the scene, we would be at point A. And at the end of the scene, we needed to be at point C. And then at point B, we could kind of mess around and play with whatever was there that night. But without expanding this thing, you know, we could improvise for 2 minutes. And sometimes, because we were young and stupid, we would take this 2-minute opportunity and make it 10 minutes. And we learned that just the whole show suffers if you do that.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, Annoyance was and still is rooted in plays and musicals and productions that are mostly written through the process of improvisation.
Okay.
And then there were some improv shows along the way. The Screw Puppies in the 90s was like our most famous improv group. And a lot of the heavy hitters were in that, and it was a late night Saturday show. But in the 90s, that was probably the most popular of the improv groups. And there was maybe in the 90s, maybe 10 different improv shows that all had different ideas.
And how did you form the theater? You said that you you knew Mick, you went to university with him, but then you cast people like, hey, there's a production, and you go and you get people in.
Yeah, I mean, that's all Mick. So when the Annoyance formed, I moved to Chicago in 1985, and by 1987, the rest of the people that we had gone to university with had moved up. And I had studied at IO, and I had studied at Second City. And then when Mick came up, he had his own track through IO and Second City, and I was also doing stand-up comedy. So we kind of kept the band together from university because those of us that were at university with Mick knew that he was a leader and knew that he was a genius. Like, he's essentially an artistic genius. And so I think Mick then found other people that he invited. So Splatter Theater was the first show when we were Metroform, and Mick cast the show.
Okay.
So that was all Mick's handpicking people. And then a lot of those people also became founders. David Rosowski was also in that cast. And I'm pretty sure online, and even on my Facebook page, there's a video of the original Splatter Theater from 1987 or 88, where I'm much skinnier. But yeah, all the casting and the invitation in a way, it was a company. It was a theater company.
Right.
It was largely done by Mick, and the rules were you just have to be a nice person. And as we grew, especially in the 90s, those of us that were around sort of when things started, we kind of fell into different roles, but it was always very clear that Mick was the leader. And I think those of us that had been with Mick since.
All right. I kind of get a little bit of kind of what do you call that? Like a thing that you want to kind of drew away because you're talking about Mick, and I wanted to talk about you. So I'm like,
yeah, no, but I mean, I've studied with great people, but the person I've learned the most from was Mick Napier. I learned a lot from Del Close. I learned a lot from Michael Gelman. I learned a lot from Jeff Michalski. I learned a lot from the people I performed with. I never took a class with David Rosowski, but I learned a lot from playing with David Rosowski. I never took a class from Mark Sutton, but I learned a lot from playing with Mark Sutton or Susan Messing or a whole list of people, and even to this day, Patty Stiles and Rebecca Northern. I learned from all of them. But it's, as improvisers, we are made up of little pieces of the people we either study with or play with. So, who I am is me that is also a container for a whole bunch of little pieces.
Yeah, I agree. As the moment I met you and I met Patty and I met all other different wonderful teachers and performers, I think I became partially you in philosophy and an improv training. And I wanted to kind of like ask why, or not why, but like maybe when you realized that you want to teach.
Well, I'm the son of a teacher and a football coach, and so I have the teaching DNA. And even in university, I think we taught some workshops, but it was always very natural for me to teach. And even when I played basketball as a kid, I was always the type of basketball player that was, a little bit of an extension of the coach on the floor. So I wasn't the most talented guy. I was talented enough, but my strength within the dynamic of the Annoyance is I tended to be a person that could rally people, that could make people feel a sense of connection. Like, I'm kind of the love hippie connection person. So, and if you've studied with me, then it's in the dynamics of Annoyance. I'm the person that could connect different cliques or groups of people. I could fit in with all of them and help people as a founder, help people feel a sense of togetherness, while Mick would lead in one way and then Mark Sutton would lead in another way. I was kind of we're all connected. We're all, it's not about being the same person. It's not about unity. It's about harmony. And so some of that, in a way, I've always been a teacher. I was kind of born a teacher. And then, even before I was a teacher, what I was teaching people by being a part of groups was I was teaching people that we're all connected. So,
didn't you want to become like one of the stars of the Whose Line Is It Anyway? Growing up in Chicago.
One of the stars of
Whose Line Is It Anyway? Or like getting into like those kind of things, movies.
No, I think for there was maybe. I mean, when I did stand-up comedy, that was the closest I came to sort of my ego feeding on, an art form, like, oh, I could take this somewhere. But really, I did stand-up comedy both as a form of therapy to talk about my Catholic upbringing and a lot of shit that I went through that, like everybody, you go through abusive shit that your parents put on you because they're just trying to do the best they can. Right. And being raised Catholic, I mean, there's a lot of former Catholics that are in comedy and improvisation because we're processing ourselves away from the shit that we were raised with. Not so different from Russian Orthodox or Greek Orthodox. It's like heavy-handed religion. It's like, let me get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
But I always, at the end of my stand-up career, and I wanted to become a better improviser and a better writer and be able to focus better. But at the end of my stand-up career, I realized, like, I don't want to, stand-up taught me that, like, I'm not interested in being a star. I'm interested in being part of an ensemble and part of a group. And even if that's just two people, like, I'm maybe my happiest when I'm just improvising with one other person or with other groups of people. And so, and probably because that's my truth, that probably speaks to why I'm such a connection whore.
Yeah. I think it's one of the, for me, it's one of the learning points from you, because I think improv is helping me a lot with not grabbing the attention, because I kind of sure most of the time that if something happens and like I would need to get up on stage, be in a spotlight, and entertain people for like unlimited amount of hours, I feel that there is enough energy and interest for me to do that. So doing improv, I'm like, no, this is how like we shared that thing. Sometimes I get out of that condition.
Yep.
And my question, therefore, is how not to become an asshole. And like, and I can also like make a reference to that. You're one of the leading trainers. You train all over the world, and I assume there are a lot of people who contact you all the time. A lot of groups, a lot of you've been to a lot of places and communities. Probably there are some people who how to say, like maybe overstep the boundaries, or like wouldn't like something, but you still manage to kind of like to, as you mentioned, unite and connect people. What's your secret aside of that? It's DNA.
I mean, I think very few people are born assholes. Sure. Again, I'm not going to, I'll try not to beat the religion drum too much, but, especially in the Catholic religion, you're born with original sin. So that means you're born an asshole. And so when, a lot of times when people have an ego that feels like I have to save the show or I need to be seen or whatever, it's just because they didn't have love when they were grown up. And that's also like where I mean, part of my journey has like been studying psychology, going to therapy, studying neuroscience, how the brain works, and then specifically, what is the nature of how is the brain working when I'm judging myself in a negative way? And then what is the behavior that compensates for my judging myself in a negative way? And a lot of times that behavior is compensating in the opposite direction. So if you are carrying shame, or if you're carrying insecurity, if you're carrying hurt, if you're carrying pain, then the natural need is for validation that you're okay. And so people step out and say in some way, look at me, look at me, look at me.
Yeah, sure.
And but because it's rooted in insecurity, because it's rooted in that pain, it's really an addiction. It's an attention addiction. So the people that need to be seen and need to be look at me, look at me, look at me, or need to always do that joke.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, they're addicted to the attention they need to try to make themselves feel validated. But on the other hand, because it's addiction, it's like cocaine, it's like a drug. Like you'll never have enough. You always need more. You always need more. You always need more. And unless they figure that out, some people become very, very, very good at that. But then they become very, very lonely people because their attention is at the expense of connection with other humans. So number one, like I'm not in charge of that. Like I've learned over the years, I'm just an improv teacher. I'm not a therapist. And improv is therapeutic, but it's not therapy.
Right.
And so when I deal with assholes, I tend to look at people. For some reason, I think I have an innate ability to look inside of people, and I try to empathize with them, and I try to see, okay, where is the pain? Where is the need? Where is the fear? And sometimes the look at me comes from like a fear of being in a bad show, or a fear that this scene is going to be bad, or it's always rooted in like an external fear about what's going on, or an internal fear about what I'm not getting or haven't had enough of. And so, part of the therapy ride is like, if you have that in your brain, you can't resist it. You have to accept that you have that need. You have to accept that you have that weakness, that pain, that vulnerability, because that's what theater's made of. And if we're improvising a longer piece, a longer format, and we're telling a story or whatever, it's not just about engineering a story that makes sense. It's, can you play characters within that story that are human, that have vulnerability, that have the same fears and insecurities and guilt and shame and all the shit that we carry around with ourselves? Can we allow those parts of ourselves to also go into the characters that are telling a story with other characters that are telling the story? Because we're all living 1,000 stories at once, and to come together, if 5 people come together to create an improvised story, that's 5,000 stories that are coming together to collaborate on one story. And what's going to make that story compelling, what's going to make that story good, isn't the funny line. It's the, can we see evidence of the commonality of each of these person's stories working together in harmony to create the story that's right here, right now? And if we can do that, then we are demonstrating an artistic expression of the greatest human need, which is to feel connected to others, which is to feel a part of a tribe, which is to know and have evidence that we are people that can feel safe sleeping, because these other people will watch the mouth of the cave and not let a tiger eat me.
Okay, yeah, I think it was very long. I hope people who don't really, who are not really good at English, they would kind of like go back and rewatch it again. I think I understood correctly, but it's well put. And
my coffee is just kicking in, so I apologize for my long answers.
No, you're good. And speaking about that feeling of connection and the tribal necessity of being together, maybe it's there is no right or wrong answer, but what would be your advices or your hints or maybe your observations of how to build the community with that or around that? And I'm asking because, first of all, community in Russia is just emerging. And I think I sometimes overthink that. I'm like, are we doing this in the right way, or should we invite more people to like the show, or should I do more marketing to invite to like grab attention, or should I do more open classes, drop-in classes? um, and like there are a lot of ways, like there's a group of people who does just jokes, and like they're not improv, but they're calling it an improv. And I'm like, I go back and forth, like, yeah, it's good the popularize it, but then still, isn't that taking away the attention? And plus, you've visited a lot of countries, as I mentioned before, and you watched a lot of communities being formed from differently from the U.S. culture. So what would be your take on that?
Well, and I've not been in Russia, but like, I mean, I'm excited that, for crazy reasons, our countries are closer than ever. And I think there's things that the United States has that Russia doesn't. And I think there's things that Russia has that the United States doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think the history and the discipline within the arts, the classic arts. I was watching a replay of Olympics with my daughter of gymnastics, and we were watching it was the women gymnasts from Russia and the United States and China, and because, for instance, the Russian gymnasts have a background in ballet, and you can see within this discipline that is gymnastics, which isn't ballet, but the background of ballet within the context of gymnastics definitely makes a Russian gymnast have something about them that is something more than what the Americans have. And maybe, or it's just something different, but it's beautiful. There's an artistry within that, in the context of gymnastics, where ballet can be a part of that. And so in this way, improvisation is like gymnastics. So some improvisation is rooted in, being able to tell a joke is an art, or is an art form. Just because it's a joke doesn't mean it's art, but jokes are an art medium. Being able to improvise for comedy with the purpose of comedy is an art form. Just because you get a laugh doesn't mean it's good improv, or doesn't mean that it's art.
Right.
Being able to improvise for truth, for emotional truth, for honesty between the two of us, it's an art medium. And if we can string together a series of interactions where now the audience can forget that we're just two improvisers, enough to take the ride and believe that we are two brothers that haven't seen each other in so many years, or whatever, that's part of the art. So the metaphor is, just like the women Russian gymnasts have that discipline in ballet, part of building an improv community is some improv studios are going to be focused on jokes, and some are going to be focused on games, and some are going to be focused on stories, and some are going to be focused on free form exploration. But all of it is improvisation. And so improvisation isn't one thing. And now, especially, the cool thing at this part of time, even if Russia's a little bit behind and it's just discovering improvisation, what Russia's going through is the same thing the rest of the world has been going through. And it's still early, which is, you feel, we call it collegial. You feel, when you first get introduced to improvisation, that is your first school. So you feel like, I love my school. And I learned improvisation. I learned vulnerability. I learned connection. I learned how to entertain an audience in this school. This must be the only way.
Yeah.
And in doing that, all of the things that I said before about the psychology and the connection and vulnerability and pain, it's like getting your first dose of medicine that makes you feel healthy and connected. So why would you believe that there's another thing, another type of medicine that's still improvisation, but it looks completely different? And so ego battles and ego and fears, and I had a friend Jeff Rogers, who is a great improviser and an actor here in Chicago, and he was quoting David Razowsky. So here's We're All Part of One Tribe. He was talking about ego is made up of our parents' fears that they have for us as parents, plus our personal fears from childhood on about the unknown. And so an ego is made up of fears and trying to keep ourselves safe, and trying to overcome fear. So it's natural to assume that if you're starting an improv theater in St. Petersburg and you've traveled and you've seen different types of improv, well, the easiest, most primal human need, the most primal human evidence that we're part of a tribe is laughing together.
Right.
I mean, short of eating food, right?
Yeah.
So of course, Whose Line Is It Anyway is going to lead the way for us, an example of what improvisation is to people who don't understand what improvisation is, because it's easily accessible. You can film a bunch of them and edit them down to an episode that works, and it provides laughter, which then releases the stuff in our brains that says, oh, this is good. But we know, I like theatrical improvisation. I like telling stories, and I like creating a play, and my focus might be different from where somebody else's focus is. But this is why I like playing with Patty Stiles. I mean, I love it because we came from two different schools. Our focus is on two different things. But at the end of the day, we learned all of these lessons about how to focus on our partner and then how to be aware of the audience. And even those things are different, but the focus is about us understanding that we are in service to each other. So even those people that are doing jokes and you're thinking like, you're giving improvisation a bad name. It can be so much more than this. Like, they're not going to ruin your improv. They might educate a group of people that this is what improv is. So part of your job is to say, okay, well, I'm Nikita and this is what improv is to me. But if you get some audience that has seen this other joke improv or just joke telling, stand up or whatever, and they call it improv, part of your job is to say, here is what improv is. And part of your job is to say, here is also what improv is. And nobody invented improv. Nothing is original. Nobody's, maybe Viola Spolin in the modern days can say, you're the mother of improv, you invented it, but she didn't. I mean, improv has been around since we evolved from monkeys.
Yeah. Okay.
Evolution is really slow improvisation, but yeah, I'll shut up because that was another long answer.
Okay. Let me see. I had a question about the management stuff because is that a common thing that being an artist or actor, then you kind of like, being motivated by a creative mood most of the time, so you might want to do something or you might not, and as long as you are doing a lot of trainings and still being an actor, how do you figure this out? Do you kind of like make a set of list for yourself and you kind of go like a project wise, or you just taking it all in as it goes? Because I know you don't have or do you have like a personal manager, like a helping out person, right?
No.
You do it yourself.
Yeah, I do it. Yeah. I mean, I manage myself, and partly because there was very few people before me that did this specifically. I mean, I think the first American kind of in this new wave of traveling the world and then combining the interests of people that studied Waddell Close or Keith Johnson or Spolin or Barral or whoever was Randy Dixon. And so Randy Dixon's from Seattle. He also studied Waddell Close, and I knew of Randy a long time ago. But from the States, it was Randy Dixon who said there's not just one type of improvisation. He has a theater that performs all different types of improvisation.
Mm.
He was one of the people that gave me a good recommendation and gave me a good word to Europe so I could start, going farther than London or farther than Scotland in the UK.
Mm.
The other person was Becky Johnson, who's a Canadian and who's also brilliant in her own right. And so in a way, I am where I am because of word of mouth, and two very talented people recommended me, but I still have to do what I do and be who I am. So I could not be, I can't be Becky and I can't be Randy. So, managing myself is more than just a business proposition. And sometimes there were times early in my career, even at the beginning of this century, in the 2000s, where it's an imperfect science, and sometimes where the business of it is concerned, sometimes I've learned an idea of what I need to make, what my value is, but I also need to make connections. I also want to help communities build. I've learned that going to festivals is a connection proposition, and I don't need to make the same money as I would make if I go in and I'm the only person there that's teaching, that's performing, that's directing. And so really, that's still about serving a community or serving a festival or serving a theater, serving connection. And so I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and 3 of my siblings are capitalists. And I tell them, like, money is not the goal, money is a consequence. And then they're, what are you talking about?
Okay.
And it's not a great business model if, I've been through bankruptcy and I don't have a lot of stuff, but I don't need a lot of stuff. But to ask somebody to manage me when I don't know how to manage me, was never really an option. And maybe once I'll be 58 on Friday. So maybe as I get into my later 60s, now that I have an idea of who I am, maybe I'll finally write my book. Maybe someday I'll have somebody manage me, but I'm just improvising this life. So
if we here's the question that I kind of circled, I need to ask it. And that was about the community.
Am I talking slow enough? Am I doing okay?
No, you're doing fine. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, how do you became a corporate training in IO, right? Because it's a little bit different. So was that a point where you went, oh, I want to help business, or you was just I don't have enough examples to bring you. So how did it happen?
Yeah, I accidentally became a corporate trainer in the 90s when my therapist had another client who worked for a corporate training company. He was a salesperson, but he also wrote short stories, and he was having a writer's block. And so I had been working with my therapist at that point, maybe 4 or 5 years. My therapist recommended to him improv class to help with his creativity. And he put me in touch with him, and we had lunch and we talked about our different worlds. And I really didn't know anything about corporate training. But he came and he took improv classes, and then I went down to see him at his office, and he took me out to lunch, and he loved improv class, and it helped him get out of writer's block. It helped him to be more creative. And it was at the Annoyance where he took classes, and he said, have you ever thought about teaching something like this? And back in the days, it was formal presentation skills and selling skills and consulting skills,
Right.
So it happened to be something that I did not have this knowledge yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up getting hired by this company because I was more rough around the edges, because I was not a typical suit.
Yeah.
But because I taught their programs, but I brought maybe 5% or 10% of an improv director's mind to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I learned corporate training.
Mm.
And I was, you know, there was, I think, 2 different times Sharna invited me to leave IO and do my own thing. And when we did the Annoyance in the 90s, I was kind of, I had 1 foot in IO and also 1 foot in Annoyance. But I always loved IO because of the group stuff.
Mm.
And when I came back to IO for good, I don't remember, sometime between like 98 and 2005 or something.
Mm-hmm.
All of the sudden improvisation for corporate people became very big. And because I had learned formal presentation skills, negotiating skills, selling skills, personality assessments, communication assessments, Myers-Briggs, people styles, you know, the different assessment tools that people would use. I learned how to speak corporate, and IO was not doing much corporate stuff. Sharna would get calls, and so we would just do basic team building like you would teach an improv class.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people started asking for more complicated stuff, and Sharna said, I don't know how to do that. And I said, I do. So I just started, Sharna started throwing some calls my way. And just like everything else, all of a sudden I was the director of corporate training for IO. And I had done some of that when the Annoyance first started, but really it just meant I answered the phone, and it was myself and Matt Walsh, who was one of the UCB guys. We would just answer the phone and they would say, can you do blah, blah, blah? And we say, yeah, of course we can. And then we would hang up the phone and say, okay, what do we do? And how do we do this? And what exercises? And, you know, we just made it up as we went along. So I can't say, I didn't sit down and have a meeting with myself or anybody. It all of a sudden just happened. And now, you know, I've kind of been in this position for 15 years or something. And even now it's like, I'm trying to figure out what is the IO version of this stuff.
Right.
You know, how do we teach improvisation on Zoom? And so I've been designing and learning this platform, and it's turned into something that, because I've done it for a long time, I say to myself, well, I must like it, or I must like something about this.
Yeah.
And it's and I noted that I had resistance to Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, why do I have resistance? Like, that's something I value is curiosity. So I just tried to become more curious about this. So, you know, it's this is what I do. It's one of the things that I do. And it's and I also enjoy teaching other people at IO. Most people that come through IO, they come through IO or Chicago for 2 or 3 years, and then they go to New York or LA. But maybe 5 or 10% of the people, they stay there. And then some of those people, then I teach them to do corporate training. And it's another way for improvisers to make money, where they don't have to be a waiter or a bartender. They don't have to be a temp in an office. And it's also a way for them to be their own business and to teach what we learn at IO. And then specifically, what makes us different is I add a little bit more neuroscience and stuff in there. So yeah, the stuff that we teach, it's definitely flavored by me. And I think it's worked out better than if I had started off saying, you know, I'm going to develop a corporate program for Sharna and see if she likes it.
You know what I ask? Because I see that because the Russian community of improv is pretty young, and people still don't know about it, and companies don't really know about it. But I realize how important would that be, taking into account all the kind of like general, it's maybe a very hard way to put it, like general sadness. Like people tend to kind of like suffer. Oh, Russians are kind of like hard and stuff. And since I came to Russia like from another country, I'm Russian by just ethnical features, and I grew up in different mentalities. So it's also like kind of a new thing for me.
Where did you grow up?
Kyrgyzstan.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
cool.
I'm a Central Asian kid.
Yeah, man.
And there's the flag, AUCA, it's American University in Central Asia. So I was
All right.
I was totally born in the American mentality. I still think I'm a mix of three, like uh, Russian ethnicity, Kyrgyz b- birth, and
Mhm.
American mentality. Uh, but I
Kyrgyzstan
see.
in the house.
What was that?
I said Kyrgyzstan in the house. Yeah, I
There you
remember
go.
you had told me that before, but I'm sorry for forgetting. But
Yeah,
super
and it's
cool.
Kyrgyzstan because people think it's
Kyrgyzstan.
Kazakhstan. Yeah, it's they're different.
Yeah, they're on top of Pakistan. Yeah,
There are a lot of Stans country around.
lots of stands.
Kyrgyzstan,
Okay.
Kyrgyzstan doesn't border with Pakistan, but like that's really out of topic.
Yeah,
Um,
no.
we, we can make a call and I'll tell you the
I'll
history
get
of.
my map out. I'll get my map out and look again.
Yeah, because I studied politics actually, and
Oh wow.
I can tell you pretty much about every country in the way how they sort of live in terms of the political uh, vision. It's interesting.
Mm.
So yeah, coming back to the corporate stuff, and I thought it would be really cool if people would be. Oh, I think our Instagram is saying us an end. Guys, thank you for watching this. Yeah, let's just end
Go
Instagram.
to YouTube after hours. Go to YouTube after hours, and maybe you can see it.
Yeah, I didn't mention that, but okay, whatever we have. Um, yeah, so I thought it would be really cool to deliver this spontaneity, this freedom, this wonderful tool that improv gives to people who work in the police, people who work in the medical sector, people who I don't know, politicians, because this is the innovative thinking, and they and it would be much easier for them to kind of like get around with their decision making. And I kind of feel that uh, maybe it's not enough, marketing force, or like I should like communicate or package myself more to be able to go there. But yet at the same time, I feel like why uh, I have a like how do you, it's not a fear, but it's like a tendency where you go to a settled company, like let's say doctors. They work right now and they work a lot. And I know examples how doctors like in other countries would go after work, visit some Zoom improv class, and they'd be grateful because it's like, wow, we played, we had fun, that it's a huge relief.
Hmm.
And I really want that to happen for them as well. But then they would probably say, what? We're serious doctors. We don't need like what is this playing stuff?
Hmm.
What would be your advice on how to like break that notion?
Well, the first thing is you have to meet them where they are, and you have to understand that. So you're talking about there's culture. So like Eastern European and Russian, typically it's not about serious necessarily. It's about the culture is more transactional. It's more
Mm,
transactional and less relational. So relationships are born through successful transactions,
mm,
as opposed to in the United States, less and less, but still, you build relationships first and then you have transactions through the relationship.
mm,
So, in an improv sense, transaction is improv game and relation is improv long form.
mm,
So, the feel good and play stuff, doctors have to be emotionally detached, especially if they're surgeons. It's a transaction. It's me. I'm going to go in, I'm going to take out a tumor. And I know everything that I know, but I also know that there's some things I won't know until I get there. And when I get there, I have to make a series of decisions based on what I discover in that moment. And those decisions cannot be emotional. Those decisions have to be based in reasoning. And then some really, really great surgeons have an instinct. And so it is taking a chance, and they are uncertain. And so where improvisation plays into their brains is, how am I as a human in the face of uncertainty when it might even be a life and death decision for this person whose life is in my hands? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so the way that you frame your improv lessons has to begin with at least an understanding of culturally what is going on in that person's brain, and also from a vocation, from a job point of view, what is the nature of their job? You know, and there's right now there's I've trained a lot of Romanians and Bulgarians, and so they're just starting, like my friends in Sofia and my friends in Bucharest. They're starting to do more corporate training, and they're coming up against this very thing. And did you go to one? Did you go to one of those places when I was there? Or like I saw you in Dubai and France. Is that right?
I was in Dubai, but not in France.
I thought I saw you in Lyon for some reason. Okay. Yeah, but I don't know if you know like Zlatin in Sofia, or if you know Bogdan in Bucharest and others, but those are like Orosi and Sofia, like those are really good people who could speak more specifically from experience. I've taught Eastern Europeans. You know, there's one of the companies that I contract to is based in Boston, and so one of their big clients is Harvard Business School. So I teach storytelling at Harvard Business School, and so storytelling for an Eastern European is a completely different person or it's a different proposition than storytelling for somebody from Saudi, or storytelling for an Aussie, or storytelling for a Brazilian. And so all of these things are like, you have to take into consideration, why am I telling this story? And so why an Eastern European or a Russian might tell a business client a story has the context of, how does this story serve the transaction?
Okay, yeah, I got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so if you're going to tell the story of why improvisation might be good for you, the first thing you need to do is to demonstrate an understanding of the psychology of the person that you're interacting with.
Yeah.
Because not all doctors are, based in transaction, but probably most are. Not all Russians are based in transaction, but they're aware of transaction. And it's the same as like doing business with French people and doing business with German people. You can't just say every French person is this or every German person is that, but you can take a good guess at how you would stand in front of each of those people, and you would be reading signals, right?
Yeah.
And really the answer to your question is, you just have to teach classes and fuck it up a couple of times.
I did. It was fun. I will never forget my first class in front of suits guys, and like it was so interesting. They'll be like, what is going on? Why am I in the kindergarten all of a sudden? It was so fun for me. I still I want the exclusive club with like super duper businessy guys that just like go in just strictly with a super expensive suit, and they'll be like going, oh gee, armatry, and I'll be looking at them, no, just like go more with your hands. So yeah, you're definitely said something that I'm like, okay, yeah, that's how it should be approached. Because at the end of the day, what I really want is to uh, get people familiarized with improv more. But then I think of it as a person who wants the acting stage and like the production at the end, or a theater piece, and it's a bit different.
Yeah, just
Um,
the last tip I'll give you is when you're teaching corporate people, you have to tell them why. And you have to be able to tell a transactional mind a why that appeals to a transaction mind.
right.
And you have to tell a relational mind, a relational brain, a why that appeals to a relational brain. And
And I
so,
think and I think it's also comes to as we go with online trainings as well. Like when you have people in the room, you not necessarily need to tell them like why, although you need. But when it's online and when you can see people, or when you do like the video thing and like these this online homeworks that I've tried to implement right now in my improv classes, I have to explain why, because people kind of like get dismotivated, like they have a lot of distractions. So yeah, the why question is really important for
yeah,
adult, I guess.
yeah, it's when I'm teaching online, I find that I say transactional words in a relational way.
Oh wow, that's
Here's here's what we're doing. Here's the three things I hope to illustrate for you to take away. And some of these are going to be easy and simple, but we're going to get repetition in them. And some of these might not be so simple, and you're not going to walk away feeling like an expert, but hopefully it'll be food for thought and that you walk away from here with something that's useful for you.
cool.
And so my saying that is starting off transactional because this medium is transactional. But
Mhm,
most people nowadays, because of the pandemic, most people are here for relational reasons.
mhm,
So you have to address the transactional nature of we're having this transaction so we can be connected. But first, let's acknowledge that we're on Zoom or on YouTube or on Instagram. Okay, what is this shit that we have to do because we can't be in the same room with each other and hug?
okay. Um, I got a bit lost. You said that you said the three tips were that you mentioned them in before. I thought you were going to mention.
The three tips. Like
Yeah,
when
yeah.
I'm teaching classes online, I don't, the why that I
Mhm.
tell them is I will tell them the objectives first.
Uh-huh.
So, like what I've been teaching online is personal stories for source material in improvisation. So, personal stories that can inspire improvisers to uh, to do a good show, or
Mhm,
to at least give them the opportunity for something that has some depth or some humanity in it.
mhm,
And so when I teach that class, I will say, here's the three things that we're going to look at: brevity, how saying less can give you more;
mhm,
sharing the internal thoughts and feelings and psychological state;
mhm,
and um, and exploring the idea that everything is connected to everything. So now
mhm,
we're not preparing stories; we're improvising a story that we already know, but we haven't told yet. So
yeah.
that would be the example of the thing where I'll give you some tips, but you're not going to master this by the end of the workshop.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. Yeah, I see, I
Does
see.
that make sense?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And
Yeah.
that way, the transactional minds at the end of this online thing, they can say, okay, did we accomplish the three things that he said we would accomplish? But the relationship minds of the people sitting there can say, okay, this is scary,
Mhm,
but and I don't know if this is going to be effective. I hope I get something. I don't know if I understand, but at least at least they know they can ask a question, and at least I make them feel comfortable in knowing that we're doing these three things, but we're also sharing personal stories. I've chosen to focus on personal stories during this period of time because I love them. I'm good at teaching them. I'm good at telling them, and because it's what we need because we're all locked in our fucking houses.
Yeah, right. Couple of, I would say, closing questions,
Sure.
because we're past 1 hour, and I don't want to keep it for too long. Since we talked about online, I'm interested uh, in what thing? I just had an idea of asking you, and I lost. Oh, I watched a COVID summit with you, and you mentioned that you had this like little folder with workshops, and then you figure out that like just 10 can be applied online. So as long as it like passed some time, were you managed to resettle or like reorganize the trainings and do it online, or you come up with something new, or it's a mixture of those things?
When you're doing stuff online, there's two approaches. There's like, what do I have that I can make fit on here?
Mm-hmm.
Or how can I look at this thing and say, what can I do with this? And so the training stuff, for me, the most obvious thing for me is that this lends itself to storytelling, to one person telling a story. That is also more fun for me, given this. Anything that is scene work and two people playing characters in a scene where we're playing honest, I'm not interested in teaching online yet. I just talked to Dave Rosowski about this last night.
Okay.
And he likes his passion, he can make fit on this.
Right.
And so I have a bunch of storytelling stuff, and then half of it is personal stuff, and some of it is more structure, some of it is improvisational story,
Mm-hmm.
some of it is games with story, like one person games with story, and then there's a show that I did that was storytelling in the 90s with 4 other guys. I did with Mick Napier and with Dave Pasquesi of TJ and Dave fame,
Mm-hmm.
and another actor named Jeff Garland, who's on Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Mm-hmm.
So the 4 of us did a storytelling show, and there was a slight format for that. So I can teach the stuff. I can teach probably 10 different workshops based on this idea of storytelling. And then as I do that, there's other ideas that I've come up with. Like I discovered there is a guy who has an audio only platform called Oozbear. And there was a Canadian that taught the bat on this platform. And then they found me. They're like, oh, who did the bat? Oh, it's you. You can do a masterclass. Yeah, okay. What is this thing? So I go to the platform, and then I see, okay, there's challenges with the sound that mean if I'm going to do a bat online, it really is going to have very little to do with what I know a bat is in real life.
Okay.
And that's something that we came up with 25 years ago. So I know the bat. I know how to teach, different versions of the bat. I could teach it in my sleep. But if I just take the idea of the bat, we're in the dark and it's only audio. Also, a passion of mine is sound production. So now it's not Zoom, it's not WebEx, it's just an audio platform that a guy from Cincinnati is building.
Okay.
And now it's like, okay, well, now it's just a playroom. So what would I want to do to play with this? And so I taught a workshop, like just a basic workshop that has 1 or 2 principles in there. And then I learned what the platform can do. And then I've been to other, I've invited other people on and I've experimented with it. So one of the things I'm thinking about in my mind is, how can I use this platform to teach another thing that's not necessarily storytelling? But like, what can this platform handle?
Okay.
So so that's that's an example of what I discovered based on the technology that exists.
Good, great. Do you still have time for two more questions?
Sure.
Out of curiosity, as a teacher, you do a lot of workshops. I wanted to know, how do you collect exercises? Do you collect exercises? Do you invent them? Or do you see the group and go, okay, I'll take this and I'll create something specific for this particular group?
Most of the exercises, so I think it's 82 different pieces of Word document with an exercise on it. And then maybe, there's some crossover between some of them. Most of the exercises are things, they're variations of an exercise I taught in one. And then I discovered a new way to do it because of the people that are here.
Yeah.
So as a teacher, typically I would teach a 3-hour workshop. So I go in and I'm like, okay, I've learned over the years, I plan for the first hour, and then I have an idea of what the second 2 hours are going to do.
Mm.
And sometimes I go in on the first hour and, oh my God, it's exactly like I thought. And then I do the things that I think I was going to do, and there's very little change. And that happens maybe 10 or 20% of the time. But 80 to 90% of the time, somewhere in that first hour, I go, oh, there's something else that's here.
Okay.
And so even as a teacher, I'm still an improviser.
Yeah.
And it's one of the values of the Annoyance Theater. It's like, if you're going to teach improv, you're not going to do it because you used to improvise. You're going to be an improviser.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think it's important.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And so part of your job as an improviser is to be able to recognize what is in the minds and the hearts of the people that are in front of you. And now you're just back to serving people. So most of my exercises are exercises that exist because a class of people taught me a different way to do an exercise that I've been doing.
See.
And that I'm sure that there's foundations or there's roots in the exercises that I teach that come from all the schools I've been in. If you trace it back far enough. But then there's also stuff that, I know that like I've just come up with that I've learned. But I also, I will take with me the brain of like, I don't own anything. No exercise is mine. And I know this is different than what some teachers feel, but I believe in sharing, and I don't believe anything is original. And, if I do an exercise that I learned from somebody else, if I do something I learned from Patty, or that I learned from Rebecca, or that I learned from Jill Bernard, then I'll say, oh, let's do a Jill Bernard thing. Let's do a Patty Styles thing. Let's do a thing that I learned from Rebecca Northen. Because that's what I am and that's who I do. But I'm not interested in checking to make sure that teachers who are using an exercise that I taught, I don't care about getting the credit. But if I can have a dialogue with people that do something, it's like, oh, how did you make it better? Or what did you find? Or what did you try? Like, I'm interested in that.
See.
So I think that answers your question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think of my exercises as this is how it's going to go. I think of it as like, okay, what am I teaching? What do your people need? What is a character, scene, story, narrative, long form, Harold, Bat? Okay. Let's it starts with who's here. And what are these people telling me about how they need to learn a thing?
All right, nice. In a closing question, would consist of two mini questions.
I love it.
What would be your advices, top three, one, for how to be a good teacher from your perspective, and two, how to be a good student.
How to be a good teacher.
Or like what not to do, maybe.
Yeah, I don't. I think it's just be yourself.
That's one.
I think it might seem the opposite, but maybe the most important words that a teacher can say are "I don't know."
Good.
And I think to, man, serve your students, not yourself. I mean, if you're going to serve yourself, do that through serving your students. But I mean, it's like, and also, it's maybe the fourth bonus question is, remember that you probably don't have any right to tell another person how to teach. I have no right. I don't have any right to tell anybody else how they have to teach.
Yeah, sure.
Certainly in a broad case, but if a specific teacher or friend, because I'm friends with a lot of improv teachers, when we talk, we might trade exercises or we might talk about something, but I'm not telling people how to teach. We really are just exploring ideas, and then we each can bring those ideas to light through just being who we are. So five, and I can't even say I'm a great improv teacher. Like, that's for other people to say. I can say I'm an improv teacher and I think I'm pretty good, but it's like, I'm just an improv teacher. And so, any given day, I'm as good as my next class. So I'm not teaching my next class yet. So I don't know if I'm a good improv teacher. I just know I'm an improv teacher.
Well, that's also a very good way of evaluation of you being a teacher.
Yeah. Being an improv teacher is about giving. It's not about proving. But when you become an improv teacher, part of your brain is going to be concerned with both proving to these people and proving to yourself that you're an improv teacher. Yeah. So it's a natural state you have to go through, I think, but it's about giving. It's about just being giving.
Mm-hmm. And if we talk about the students, it might be easier.
Be open, be honest, be in service.
Be in service mean trust your teacher. Is that right?
No, you don't have to trust your teacher. Question everything.
Yeah.
But be open and be honest. Feel what you feel. If you're resistant to something, if you sense that something is bullshit, then you're allowed to think something's bullshit. I think trust is earned. I think to give away trust without it being earned, or everybody's in charge of their own trust. So, some people, I'm still a pretty trusting person. But as a student, you have the right to like or not like anything, including the teacher, including an exercise. You can say stop at any time. But if you're open and honest, and know that you're, be curious what's going on. But yeah, you don't, just because a teacher's, I mean, this is how I was as a kid. I didn't trust any teacher because I'm the son of a teacher and a coach. And it's like, I might listen to you, but I also, even when I was a child, I could see if people are full of shit. And if they're full of shit, then it just depends on my mood that day. So even Del Close, oh my God, Del Close was full of a lot of shit, man. But he was fucking Del Close. So a lot of times it's like, okay, I'm just gonna, let's hear what the old man says. And a lot of times, you know, you could hear him talk for an hour and 45 or 50 minutes of it is bullshit. But the 10 or 15 minutes that was not bullshit, like,
Yeah.
whoa, okay. So yeah, just be open, be honest. What was the third thing I said?
Be in served.
Oh, be in service. Yeah, you're in service. Yeah, I am in service to my scene partner. I am going on stage. I am in service to my scene partner, but the annoyance theater says be in service to yourself. Take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Give yourself a point of view, give yourself a thing to start from. And through assuming strength for yourself, then give the gift of that strength to the other person. And you don't have to trust anything. And if something doesn't feel right, if you think something's bullshit, then speak up and say, I think this is bullshit. And the teacher can either address the bullshit, or the teacher can say, if you think this is, here's what we're going to do. And if you think this is bullshit, then you can sit out and just watch. And the other people can do this if people are willing to do that. But it's, as a teacher, if somebody thinks something is bullshit, I certainly want to hear about it. But being in service to the rest of the people in the class means after a minute, it's on me to see, am I the only one that thinks this is bullshit? Okay, maybe I'm wrong, but my choice is to sit out and let me watch you people do this. So maybe my mind can be changed.
Awesome. Joe, thank you very much for being tonight with, I cannot say us, I think it was me. And yeah, hopefully we'll get some audience. And I want to do a little, I don't know, would that be a challenge or something, or request, or maybe a motivation? I want to take a picture of both of us, and I'm going to send it to you. And if you're going to have Instagram, I motivate you to post this first picture, so you don't have to think, oh, what to do, how do I figure out Instagram? You already have the picture.
Well, I can, sure, if I do it, but I will post this picture on my Joe Bill Teaches Facebook page.
Okay.
And then since this is recording on YouTube, will there be a recording of this that's on YouTube?
Sure, it will.
And so I can post the link of this interview on my Joe Bill Teaches page on Facebook, so that people can watch it later if they want.
Okay. Yeah. Ready for the picture?
Here we go. Hold on.
3, 2, 1. Okay. There we go.
You got it?
That was Joe Bill, ladies and gentlemen. Who am I talking to? Thank you very much. It was lovely.
Thank you, Nikita.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, my friend.
All
bye-bye.
Right. Goodbye, goodbye. And we're gonna end it. How are we gonna end it?